All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're going to unpack a really fascinating source document that connects a famous psychological bias with, of all things, long-standing religious debates. It's a link you'd probably never make on your own, and believe it or not, it all kicks off with a really strange question. So let me ask you this, straight up. Could smearing lemon juice on your face make you invisible to cameras? I know it sounds completely absurd, right? But one man was absolutely 100% certain it would work. And his story, well, it's the key to understanding everything else we're about to talk about. So meet MacArthur Wheeler. Back in 1995, he walked into two banks in Pittsburgh and robbed them. Now, he didn't wear a mask. Instead, he covered his face in lemon juice. His logic? Lemon juice can be used as invisible ink, so obviously it would make his face invisible to the security cameras. He was, of course, totally wrong, and the police arrested him that same night. But his incredible, baffling confidence in such a flawed idea got a couple of psychologists thinking. Yeah, Wheeler's bizarre case of misplaced confidence wasn't just some funny story on the nightly news. Nope. It actually became the direct inspiration for a groundbreaking study in social psychology. And this is what it led to. In 1999, two psychologists, David Dunning and Justin Kruger, published a paper defining what we now call the Dunning Kruger effect. It's this weird quirk of the human brain where people who have very little knowledge or skill in something, well, they tend to dramatically overestimate how good they are at it. And here's the crucial part. They're so incompetent, they literally don't have the tools to see their own incompetence. This quote just nails it, doesn't it? The Dunning-Kruger effect isn't really about intelligence. It's about a lack of what's called metacognition, which is just a fancy word for the ability to think about your own thinking. You don't know enough to even realize how little you know. Okay, so lemon juice, bank robbers, a cognitive bias. How on earth does this connect to our main topic? Well, the source document we're breaking down today takes this very idea and applies it to a totally different and often pretty heated arena, the criticism of a religion. And here is the core argument the source makes. It proposes that the Dunning-Kruger effect could be a useful lens for looking at the dynamic between critics and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It suggests that maybe, just maybe, some of the most confident critics are operating from a place of limited knowledge, kind of like our friend the lemon juice bank robber. And this shows that the source is dealing with a conflict that has a really long history. I mean, this isn't new. It started with accusations of subversion way back in the 1830s. Then it turned into a national conflict over polygamy. In the 20th century, it shifted to more theological attacks. And now, here we are in the 21st century, with internet amplification and, of course, meme culture. The debate has changed, but the tension has always been there. So to really build its case, the source hones in on a central figure, the church's founder, Joseph Smith, and the completely opposite ways people see him. The source document points out this huge contrast. On one hand, it says many lay critics confidently just dismiss Joseph Smith as a simple con artist or an incompetent fool. But on the other hand, it highlights a totally different take from a number of respected academics, even scholars who are not members of the church. And here's a killer example from the source. This is a quote from Harold Bloom, a legendary literary critic from Yale University. Now, he was not a Latter-day Saint, not by a long shot, but he looked at Smith's work and saw this undeniable creative and theological power, flat out calling him an authentic religious genius. And the source doesn't just stop with Bloom. It lists several other non-LDS scholars who, even if they didn't buy into his religious claims, saw the incredible depth and impact of what he created. The argument here is that the experts, the people who have actually studied the history and the texts for years, often see a much more complex picture than the simple caricatures that get thrown around. So, building on that idea, the source then turns its attention to specific recurring criticisms, things it calls tropes, arguing that they are perfect examples of this knowledge gap in action. First off, let's be clear on what the source means by a trope. It's not just a theme. In an argument, it's like a rhetorical shortcut. An oversimplified claim that gets repeated so much it starts to feel true, even if it's missing the full context or isn't totally accurate. All right, here is the first big example the source tackles. This is probably one of the most famous caricatures you hear about the faith. So where does this whole thing come from? Well, according to the document, it's a massive oversimplification of a really complex theological concept called exaltation, the idea that humans can progress to become like God. The source is very clear. The "you get your own planet" idea is a pop culture caricature. It's not actually the church's doctrine. The second trope the source dives into is another one that's really persistent and well known: the idea that members of the church are practicing polygamy today. The source chalks this one up to a pretty common case of mistaken identity, confusing the mainstream Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints with fundamentalist splinter groups that have absolutely no connection to it. It then clarifies the key fact: the mainstream church officially stopped the practice way back in 1890 and will excommunicate any member who tries it today. Okay, so after laying out the psychology and applying it to these specific examples, the source gets to the big finish: why connecting these two completely unrelated things is actually important. So what is the big takeaway here? Look, the source isn't saying all criticism is invalid. Not at all. What it is proposing is that the Dunning Kruger effect offers a potential framework. It suggests this cognitive bias can help explain why some arguments, especially the ones built on these tropes and caricatures, can be delivered with a level of confidence that is completely out of whack with the speaker's actual depth of knowledge. And this is where it becomes valuable for all of us, way beyond the specific debate. According to the source, just being aware that the Dunning Kruger effect exists is super useful. It's a good reminder to be a little more humble, to be conscious of our own blind spots, and to remember that real expertise requires you to never stop learning. And that leaves us with one last question to think about. Whether it's in political arguments on social media, in discussions at the office, or even in our own hobbies, where else do we see this pattern? Where does that supreme confidence mask a real lack of knowledge? And the hardest part, how can we get better at spotting it, not just in other people, but in ourselves?